Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and I'm here with Norm Verbeck, Quality Management Consultant here at Core Business Solutions. Glad you could be with us again, Norm.
Glad to be here, Xavier.
Today's show is entitled It's Getting Better All the Time, where we're going to look at continuous improvement ideas and how your quality management system can help drive your business improvement. Now, if you've listened to the Quality Hub before, you may already be familiar with Norm, but in case you haven't, let's learn a little bit more about him. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself there, Norm?
Sure, Xavier. So I've been with Core Business Solutions for about 2.5 years now. My previous experience, I have about 15 years in quality management systems and continuous improvement, primarily in the printing industry.
Okay.
And then I have about 5 years experience where I was working in more supply chain.
Okay.
Previous to Core.
That's cool. I didn't realize you were in the printing industry. So was this like newspaper type stuff or?
Actually, it kind of varied. The particular location where I was mostly based out of was primarily books and actually telephone directories, which are
kind of a moot point now, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, you can just look at Google for it.
Yep. So yes, again, time has changed. So that obviously declined over time, and books as well. And printing industry, 15 years experience. That's what my background originally was in my initial schooling.
That's great.
Yep.
I still love the smell and the feel of a good hardcover book, though. I'm going to be honest. Maybe I'm old, but whatever.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about continuous improvement here today. So, Norm, how can we use our quality management system to help continually improve our business?
So opportunities for improvement can come up through a variety of different ways. As part of your QMS, they could be action items resulting from possibly follow-up activities that you should already be performing based on your QMS requirements. So you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. Those opportunities could be coming from management review meetings, any corrective actions, any type of risk analysis that you might be doing, and actions that you might be taking to reduce or alleviate those risks or opportunities.
You gain the opportunities that can come from that.
There also could be actions that are aimed at addressing and improving customer feedback. These are often documented in action plans that a company can track responsibilities for, due dates, and track closure for effectiveness of actions.
I know that the 9001 specifically really does build that continuous improvement in it. Part of it is just following the plan, like you're saying. Do what the standard asks you to do. But I know that getting into the nuts and bolts can be a little bit tricky sometimes, especially if you haven't done it before. You talked a little bit about risks there. How can we identify and assess those risks that could impact our business?
So those could occur in a less formal format throughout the year. So again, you're kind of capturing those during your management review meetings that you're conducting. There could also be completion of corrective actions, any associated root cause analysis that you might be doing with those. You're going to try to identify, what are causing the problems when they occur, and then hopefully making improvements in those areas.
So that could be anywhere you're going to do those corrective actions, whether you're looking at customer feedback, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about. Do you find within those management reviews and you're looking at corrective actions, what are the risks that are often come up?
So a lot of times, you'll start into root cause analysis, and a lot of times, companies will occasionally stop with maybe there was an issue with an employee that they didn't fully understand what the requirements were.
Okay.
So again, usually you want to go a little bit deeper and try to identify, why didn't they understand those requirements? Was there some sort of issue with our training program? So
getting into the process, what's wrong with the process, not necessarily a person doing something wrong, but finding out why and the process behind it that failed.
Absolutely. And there could be other methods. I mean, as far as the risk goes, some companies do a SWOT analysis, identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's usually a little bit more subjective. They could do a more thorough kind of quantitative analysis. One example would be an FMEA, which stands for Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. That's usually using a scale for impact and likelihood, and then trying to come up with some scoring. You usually multiply those two scores, risk and likelihood, together to come up with a risk prioritization number.
Right, and then hit the ones that are big and choose what you're going to do with the other ones.
The big piece is when you're kind of going through that analysis, trying to come to that consensus with members of your team. Because, obviously, depending on what your role is, you might perceive things a little bit differently.
That's a good point.
So it's good to kind of have that consensus amongst the group so that because obviously, companies have limited resources. You can only address so many things at one time.
Well, and if something's going to shut down your production, that's a pretty big risk. And if it's a manager on the floor telling them, hey, we have a piece of machinery that we're constantly fixing and it's end of life, parts are becoming scarce, that's probably a risk you might want to focus on a little bit more than something else that isn't, can cause a drastic effect on your ability to produce whatever you're producing.
That's exactly right. So especially the ones that are going to shut you down. So like a good example from, over the last couple of years is COVID.
Oh my goodness, yeah. We've only lived through that for 2 years?
Yep.
How many people had that planned and that risk looked at?
Exactly. And, the initial, shutdown, that impacted a lot of businesses. Mm-hmm. So, but, most companies at this point are going to have some sort of plan moving forward for what they're going to do to address it. So,
absolutely. You're going to be looking at KPIs. What do we look for to identify trends and areas for improvement using those KPIs?
So there's a couple different things that you should focus on when kind of identify those trends or, KPIs that you should be measuring. Usually they tie back to one of the opportunities or risk areas for your business. So obviously those are things that you want to measure and make sure things are improving or at least maintaining at least. But when setting goals and KPIs, it's beneficial to make sure that they are SMART goals, so that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and then time-bound. So they should have some sort of date as far as how they're relevant.
You have the metrics you're looking at. It's specific. It's not too ambiguous of what we're trying to judge. What's achievable, what's relevant. And I guess that would be based on the risk as well, how relevant it is. And let's get it done within a certain amount of time.
Absolutely. So, and then, whenever you make sure that they're measurable, this allows for identification of trends in relation to positive or negative performance to those targets. Many KPIs can be traced back to data that's being captured in an ERP system, that's an enterprise resource planning system, or at the very least should be tracked in a spreadsheet. So you can kind of monitor that performance as the year or years go on.
And we have that ability in Core as well, do we not?
Absolutely.
Where we can track our KPIs, look at things, and that's going to make it easier with running reports, looking at trends.
Yes, and we have a very good auto form for objective and KPI tracking that once they're set up, there's a snapshot that's real time that you can just, at a click of a button, you can go in and view a dashboard to see how you're performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we have another program which is called the Core Side Chat, and we talk about some of those reports and analysis that you can look at through dashboards and things like that, which is really, really helpful.
And then that data and information, whenever you review that can lead to identifying opportunities, threats, risks, other issues that you might be identifying, over the course of the year or years when you're tracking those. The trick primarily is to make sure that the analysis and evaluation is systematic, that is transparent, and it becomes part of the way you do your business. Kind of phrase that I used to hear many times over the years was, in God we trust, everyone else bring data.
Exactly. You can have a sense of, well, I feel like we're not doing this well. What do you have to back it up?
That's right.
Or to prove otherwise, it absolutely totally makes sense. Do you find that there is a time frame that you should judge those trends on? Is it usually based on like how frequently your management review is? How often you get data? Is it a yearly thing? Or does that really kind of depend on what you're tracking?
Most of the objectives in my experience, I always track them pretty much monthly. Okay. So you might not necessarily be reporting or reviewing what actions you need to take on a monthly basis, but I would usually track them monthly just so that then whatever frequency you determine you're going to do your management reviews, whether it's quarterly, twice a year, or whatever, that you have the data available. So obviously, the shorter amount of time that you've been measuring an objective, you can't make very good adjustments because you just might not have much data yet.
Right.
But the important thing is to start measuring. So, those measurements drive behaviors. And then also, what you're measuring typically what gets improved.
Right. Do you find that it's easy to look at things too frequently or is it really being on the pulse of it by looking at it frequently?
You want to stay on the pulse of it, but you don't want to, have those knee-jerk reactions to those outliers, like something that might pop up in a given month that really threw the data off, or the performance numbers where you're typically performing. So it's important to understand like where those outliers are and investigate some of those. Ideally, you want to kind of look at it over a longer term to see if your company's improving or potentially, declining in performance. But
so maybe if you do see something on a month and the action is, hey, let's look at why was there an outlier? Was there a really bad customer experience we had and that caused our customer feedback to be lower than before or something like that?
Absolutely.
Okay, that totally makes sense. At least the more frequently you're looking at it, the more quickly you can determine what caused that effect.
Yes.
That makes sense.
And a lot of those goals or targets will come from what's important to your customers. So obviously, one of the more common ones that typically, in my experience, we always tracked was, on-time delivery or on-time shipment, because typically when you take an order from a customer, you're agreeing to that promise date when you're going to ship it or deliver by. So obviously that's important to the customer. So that was one of the common ones, for example, that we used to track to make sure that we were meeting the requirements of our customers.
Right. And if you're not, well, what's the cause in it? Is it maybe it's the shipper?
Exactly.
So this is sort of a change in culture.
Yes.
Especially if you're new to a quality management system. How do you continually foster that culture of continual improvement?
So this is an area where you don't really necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, obviously there's some things that you're already doing as a company with, business operations, but ensure engagement of employees throughout various levels. So you want to make sure that, the engagement and reviews are not just mostly from management. You want to make sure you're reviewing that throughout all levels of the organization and trying to drive those improvement ideas, because the folks, if you're in a manufacturing environment, for example, the employees that are actually out on the floor performing the work, that's where a lot of your better ideas are going to come from as far as ways to be more efficient, remove waste from your process. But
potential problems that they're saying, whether it's equipment-based or something, anything that helps you with that productivity.
But, there's often a lot of preconceived notions on how a job is supposed to be performed. But when you actually go out to the production floor, for example, or business operations in the service industry, when you actually go to the people that are doing the work, the expectation that what you have that as far as preconceived with how something should be done might not be the reality of what's actually being performed today. So it's good to keep up to date and to keep up with the pulse of the actual employees doing the work.
I almost use the example of like an engineer. They design this, and then once it's built and put into production and people start using it, then you see some of the faults you don't think about. Why did they put the oil pan bolt there? Or I have a special tool that I have to get to just to drain the oil from this thing. The engineer wasn't thinking about that. Almost the same kind of thing. Management might not be thinking the same way the common worker that uses this device to make something every day thinks about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes it's not necessarily thought through all the way to the end user, for example, as far as, what's going to be accessible in that case. The other area, as far as like whenever you do identify action items, you want to make sure you're driving accountability for those action items that are open and that you have them assigned to the appropriate personnel. I've seen many examples where an action item is listed with a department or maybe multiple people. And when you're stopping at that either department level or multiple people, nobody necessarily owns it. So it's really good to kind of be concise with, who has responsibility.
I thought Jim had it. Well, I thought Joe had it.
Exactly. Yeah. So if it's not specifically assigned one person for reporting out and updating management on progress, many action items don't gain traction towards completion. And then another piece of that is, implementing a method to collect and evaluate feedback from employees. That's another way to foster continuous improvement. Not all employee suggestions may be realistic or actionable, but it's beneficial to at least provide a forum for employees to provide feedback or offer recommendations for improvement. Some of the options that you can typically implement might be survey, maybe a suggestion box, or I've often seen it even reviewed during an annual performance reviews with employees. So the important piece is that it's often overlooked is to follow up and provide feedback to employees. So even if you have those opportunities for improvement identified, you can't necessarily, again, companies have resources or budget constraints, so you might not be able to take action all the time, but it's important to have that follow-up and at least provide the feedback for why or why not, why you might not.
Hey, this is a great idea. We acknowledge that you said something that might be helpful. It's just not what we can do right now.
That's exactly right.
Exactly makes sense. That totally makes sense. Well, you've got a lot of experience, like you said, with working with so many businesses and helping them with their quality management systems. Do you have any stories or examples of working with a company who's really adopted this continual improvement idea and it's had an impact on the company?
Sure. One of the best examples I can think of, going back to my experience within the printing industry, is one of the things that would typically occur is a common recurring nonconformance would be when you're producing a book, per se. A book might be broken up. If it's a 400-page book, it's broken up into 50-page, they call them signatures or sections of the book. So those are all collated later in the production process after those sections are printed. But one of the common mistakes was it was called like a double missing signature. So you'd have duplicate section of like, say, the same 50 pages in a book, and then it might be missing 50 pages. So how that happens is in, the binding operation, those sections are loaded on, it's a big collating machine or binder, but basically they're loaded on the machines. If you mistakenly put a bundle of the wrong product on that loader, then you're going to have duplicate signatures within that finished book. So one of the things was, kind of thinking a little bit outside of the box as far as like what we could do to prevent that from occurring is if you think of like barcodes. So within that operation, when you're printing the signature, we actually ended up printing a barcode on the spine of that signature. So that spine gets ground off during the binding process. So by printing that barcode, we were actually able to put scanners on those loaders so that if it identified the incorrect barcode, it would shut the machine down. So now you would have a little bit of downtime removing those incorrect signatures and putting new ones on, but at least it was preventing incorrect product from being made.
And waste too.
So, that's one from, an error or a mistake that was made. But again, kind of thinking outside the box a little bit is how can we potentially help to kind of foolproof the process, as far as shutting the machine down if it detects that. So
yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, that's great. Well, this has really been helpful. Very interesting too, because we've often said continual improvement is the whole point of quality management systems. And seeing how there's these things that are in play that are provided by the standard to tell you and show you how you can gain improvement and then have it continually happen is really, really, really helpful. I really appreciate you talking to us about it today.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
We want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today. We sincerely hope you found it insightful and gained some valuable takeaways from it. In case you haven't already, we encourage you to subscribe to the Quality Hub to receive timely updates on our upcoming podcast releases. Thanks for your support and have a great day.